And it's hard to be optimistic about a team that you feel like is backpedaling, that's a game under 500 halfway through or starting into the second half of the season, obviously now. And when you look at it, you go, look, our starting center is gone. The quarterback situation is back to square one. They seemingly have completely mismanaged the way that they want to do this transfer of power, if you will. All of it feels like it's just circling the drain, and that the most exciting thing to happen is whether or not Blue can get a pass, a Nerf football into the bucket from level 3, and somebody gets a free plane ticket on Allegiant.
He wrecked some kids in Minnesota. I don't know if you saw that. They had like a mascot game.
I did see, yeah. Mascot games are awesome. But here's the good news for the Colts. I think at this point we are entering into the area of scoreboard watching. And I know that typically scoreboard watching, and coaches and players will tell you till the cows come home, we can't do that. We got to focus on what we do. We got to pay attention to our job. We got to blinders on, earmuffs, all that stuff, right? Okay, yada. But the reality is you start now's around the time, because the NFL season is weird every year. The NFL is weird because, as I always say, every year there is a team or two that you look at and go, are they good? I didn't think they'd be good, but they're hanging around. Are they like the Denver Broncos? Are they good? Are they competent? Or have they just had breaks go their way? The Washington Commanders, are they good? And then there are teams that you say to yourself, are they actually bad, or have they just not been healthy? I haven't paid attention. Like, what's going on there? For example, the Dallas Cowboys. 3-5, right? But one of those teams that falls into the latter category, the Cincinnati Bengals. Jimmy, you've been high on the Bengals,
yes.
And I'm not saying you're wrong in doing so. They have dynamic talent. They haven't necessarily always been healthy. But at some point, if the Bengals are going to get things going, they better hurry up. And last night, when they decide to go for 2, they get denied. They lose to Baltimore. I mean, the division obviously is sayonara for them, but then you start scoreboard watching because you look around at the wild card picture. Because the Colts, the division is pretty much sayonara. But here they are at 4-5, and they needed Cincinnati to lose that game. And the good news for the Colts is that before they even play this weekend, there actually is some level of optimism for them heading into, because at the very worst, they go into it now. If they lose, they're still tied with Cincinnati, and that's within breath of the playoffs still. And I know it's very early to start talking playoffs, but is it? Because you're starting to now have teams, it's pretty clear which lane they're going to stay in. And I think we can safely say that the Colts are right there in a mix with Denver, the Bengals, and the Jets, who they still have to play, and nobody's going to see it because they took it off prime time because they didn't want to actually torture anybody, right? So that was good news for last night for the Colts.
Yeah, it was great news. I'm still all in on the Bengals. You look at schedule the rest of their way. I think they can go 6-1. I don't think they're going to run the table because they play Pittsburgh twice, but I think there's a real chance they go 6-1. That puts them at 10-7, and that doesn't change your outlook, though, Jake. I mean, I don't think the Broncos are for real. I think they haven't really played anybody. They have a good defense. Bo Nix has been hit or miss, but they're not like this unbeatable team. And the Chargers, while they've been very effective defensively, it's kind of the same thing. They haven't really had this gauntlet to face. So the trajectory still lines up for Indianapolis to get in. I am curious in the coming weeks for your scoreboard watching Good News conversations if the Jets are at all involved in that, because I kind of expect them to fade away and fade towards the back where the Dolphins and the Titans and other teams currently sit, just looking up and hoping for that sweet release of death.
I mean, when you look down there, it is funny. There are a couple of teams that even with injuries and everything else, I mean, Miami, Cleveland, those two are two of them that you're like, I can't believe they're in the position that they're in. All told, with much of the Colts season, truthfully, has been self-inflicted. Just mismanagement, bad decisions. Probably, I think you could certainly make the argument at the quarterback position that they have been too reactionary. But even still, Cleveland's quarterback position obviously has been a disaster as well, and that's also self-inflicted. But
I didn't see this season from Jacksonville. Like, I didn't think it was going to be this
that's
bad
another
for
one.
them. Like,
and now Trevor Lawrence is out, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that I thought they were going to be, a favorite to go to the AFC title game, but I did not expect a 2-7 start for them.
All right, good afternoon to you on a Friday, by the way. That is Jimmy Cook. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison is here as well. The name of the program is Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan. Good show lined up for you today. We'll talk a little Indiana football. We'll talk about it with somebody who covers Michigan, as the Wolverines are next on Indiana's march to, when you look at the college football playoff, and we've talked about it, Indiana's path now. I'm telling you right now, when they do the final playoff pairings and they announce the lineups and the matchups of the 12 teams that are going to be in the new expanded college football playoff, they're going to sit there and they're going to ask the panel of experts, the college coaches that are there and the Kirk Herbstreets and Chris Fowler and whatever, they're all going to be breaking down. Somebody is going to say,
R.I.P. Ben Herbstreit, by the way. We didn't talk about that yesterday. Too much going
on. That's Kirk Herbstreit's golden retriever, a very cute fellow who passed away. I believe he was 11 or 12, right?
Yep.
But when they are talking that out and laying it out, you mark my words, they're going to say, hey, Georgia's playing really good football. Texas is a really good team. Oregon, look at what they did when they went to Columbus. Ohio State, Ryan Day's got a lot of weapons. Somebody is going to say, guys, I'm looking over this, and I hear you with Georgia, and I hear you with Penn State, and I hear you with Ohio State. But why not Indiana?
Are they allowed to say that?
I was about to say, they can't say that.
That's important.
Trademarked.
You get a fee every time they say it in the committee meetings?
Wait till the trademark goes through.
All right.
Attorneys working right now to finalize the trademark, so don't even bother trying to patent it because it's already been submitted, right?
Exactly.
But I'm telling you,
patent pending.
The patent's coming. I'm telling you. Why not Indiana? That's what's going to be said, right? And I know that you're using a phrase there, but I have to be legally. I have to.
No. I don't want any type of ambiguity about the status of your ongoings.
But the Michigan game is a big one, and I think if Indiana beats Michigan, then so long as they are within, if Indiana beats Michigan, because I think we can safely say they're going to win the bucket game. No offense to Purdue, no disrespect to Purdue, right?
It's just the reality.
If Indiana beats Michigan, then I think so long as they are respectable in Columbus, they're in.
Some will tell you they don't, and I get it. It's an important caveat, but a couple of the people we've had on that, religiously cover college football, Thor Nystrom most notable, feels like it doesn't matter how that Ohio State game goes. Just chalk it up as a loss just for the sake of it. Not saying they can't win that game, but simulate it however you want, 55-10 or 21-20. A one-loss Indiana with how well they've played all year out of a Power 5 is probably comfortably in. But, Jake, the committee's weird to your overall point, so you want to keep that game close. But, yeah, one-loss Indiana, this is the one thing I was worried about. I want to know if you were at all anxious, might be too strong a word, but if you were cautiously evaluating what happened with the rankings earlier this week. If they were going to have them as a fringe team, like the 12th team in, then I was going to be worried about, okay.
Like SMU. SMU's right on the outside looking in, right?
They're not taking Indiana seriously. The fact they put them squarely in the field at 8 makes me feel like, one loss, you're in. As long as it's
the reality is this. I've said this forever. I remember Jerry Palm got into an argument with me on the air, and I mean, who am I to argue with the NCAA bracket about Jerry Palm? But I will absolutely stand my ground on this. People can tell me that this isn't the case. People can tell me that they've been to the NCAA mock tournament selection overnight fantasy camp at the JW Marriott, and so therefore they know. People can tell me all those things.
Did you do that or only Derek?
No, I didn't do that.
I didn't think you did.
No, I'm not 12.
I understand.
So the reality is this. Human nature comes into play in anything. And when you are talking about, and this is the argument that I had on the NCAA in basketball, the selection show. I'm telling you, and I will go to my grave with this. On Selection Sunday in basketball, if the selection committee has the choice between a 22-11 Kentucky or a 27-4 UTEP, Kentucky gets the nod every time.
Yeah.
Because, and they can say, no. You don't know what you're talking about because they don't look at the name of the school. They do not look at the name of the school. You can figure it out when you look at, when even if it's done blind, you can figure out, you know who they're talking about, right?
Syracuse is the prime example of the tournament, like the last decade.
Yes.
Oh, why are they in the play-in? We didn't look at their name. We just looked at who they played.
Because they know, and this absolutely factors in, they know for a fact, and I'm talking about the basketball side of things, that if you were to send Kentucky to Boise for the first round, they're going to sell 10,000 tickets. They're going to travel. They're going to do everything else. You send UTEP to Syracuse, and there's one guy who his grandmother lived in El Paso, so he goes and gets a ticket, and then two other people that won a contest at Hy-Vee, and so they got free tickets, and they go to the game. In football, the reality is this. Indiana, in their resume right now, in terms of their strength of schedule, in terms of their margin of victory, it is very parallel with where Michigan was a year ago, with where Georgia has been of recent at this point in the season. And those teams were ranked in the top 3 or 4 in the first playoff ranking, and Indiana is 8. And people have pointed out that name brand precedent bias comes into play and that it's unfair. And yes, maybe it is unfair, but it's a fact of life. It's just a reality. It's just a reality. The reality is, I'll give you an example. When I was in college, I had a friend that worked for a major clothing company, major one, big-time brand, every mall in America, big-time expensive household. Every kid wanted it on the Christmas list brand, okay? He worked for that clothing company.
Old Navy, nice.
And a big company.
I know, I understand. I'm being
big
flippant.
ticket. Well, but Old Navy's kind of in the same discussion here. So
yeah.
let me finish because it's kind of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So I'm asking him about this big ticket item. You know, the shirts were $70 a piece for a polo shirt. And he says to me, "You want to know a little tip?" I go, "Okay." And he goes, "The machine, when it spits out as we're tagging the shirts, every 10th shirt gets tagged with a different label of a brand, and we'll just call it, for the sake of argument here, Pleasant Plains. That's the brand that goes on every 10th one of them. And the Pleasant Plains shirts go into a different bin, and the other 9 go into the high-ticket $70. It's the exact same shirt, right? The Pleasant Plain is then sold as the house brand on a much lesser-named store in America. People pay 7 times the price for the big name brand because of the brand name. It's the exact same shirt. But the brand name, people just say it's better. Why is it better? Because I know of it. It's been around forever. I've seen it in the store. That's Georgia. That's Texas. That's Ohio State. Indiana's Pleasant Plains. It just is. It's the new arrival. It's the one that people are like, I don't know, it kind of feels like IKEA. Like when you really break it down, is it really the same quality as like what I'm going to get Ethan Allen? Yeah, it probably is. Less expensive, a little more work to put into it, right? A little more that goes into the eye test. It's Indiana's job now to validate it and show that they belong. And Indiana probably gets less benefit of the doubt, where they probably do need to beat Michigan and then fare well against Ohio State. If they lose to Michigan and then lose to Ohio State, I think it drops them out because they're Indiana. Yeah. But if they beat Michigan, I think if their only blemish on the season is at Ohio State, with the way that they've won the rest of the games,
they're in.
I think they're in, because there's also nobody that like really is pounding on the door that SMU is the one, you feel pretty good in a head-to-head there in terms of resume.
You just don't want to put yourself in a situation where like a 2-loss LSU or a 2-loss Texas A&M can match up with you. That's your point about the 2 losses for Indiana. If Indiana has 2 losses, that's where you get into that brand equity conversation of, oh, well, look at the Tigers. Look what Brian Kelly's done down there. Look at Texas A&M. They've had a pretty good season. Wait, we're going to put Indiana in over them? You just don't want to be a part of that comparison conversation. 1 loss keeps you out of that. 2 losses, you're then asking the committee to make brand equity a part of the ranking system. Fair or not, that's what happens. That's what happens when you're having to make these decisions. You see it all the time in the NCAA tournament, as you outlined. 1 loss Indiana, good. 2-loss Indiana, I worry you get leapfrogged by Brian Kelly or somebody along those lines.
Yeah, by the way, and LSU with a 2-loss LSU and a 2-loss Indiana. They don't feel comparable, right?
No. Sadly.
Because you automatically assume, well, LSU lost 2 games, but they were 105,000 people under the lights, and it was the game of the week, and it's a hostile environment, and but they lost to Mississippi State. Yeah, but it's the SEC. Branding goes a long way. Branding goes a long way, right? Why did people go to California, to the beautiful, Manhattan Beach of California, and rave about the sunset when the same thing's available in Panama City, Florida? Because branding goes a long way. Reputation goes a long way. Cachet goes a long way. It just does. SEC, though. You been to a night game in the SEC?
It's on the bucket list.
One of the most...
But no. I have a buddy that's going for his birthday this weekend to LSU.
I'm telling you, LSU or Tennessee.
Shout out Nick Kuntz. Happy birthday, man.
If you've never been to a game, happy birthday, Nick. If you've never been to a game at Tennessee at night, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen is I was at a game is it Neyland Stadium in Tennessee, in Knoxville? Whatever their stadium is. I was there when Peyton Manning's jersey number got retired. I had to cover it. And so I'm walking around after the half, and I'm up in the upper walkway of the stadium, and I'm just walking around. It's like the third quarter of the game. They're playing South Carolina. Tennessee wasn't very good. It was the beginning of the end of the Phil Fulmer era. But I'm walking around on the upper walkway. It looks just like Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, but a bigger version of it, but where you've got the ramp, right, that's up. And I see, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I think, oh, my gosh, I'm witnessing potentially a terrible, terrible tragedy here. Is that girl looking to – she's staring over the ledge, surely, and her friend is standing behind her, saying something encouraging to her. And I'm thinking that, she's talking her literally off the ledge because Tennessee's down. I don't know what's going on. Then I get up there and realize that her friend is actually just the definition of friend, because she's holding her hair back and then making sure that she's sitting, that she's not going to fall over while she's vomiting over the railing 4 stories up, right? So the girl, in one of the most incredible feats of athleticism and conscientiousness that I've ever seen in my life, manages to basically projectile, right? But then have both the presence of mind and the clarity of mind and the rapid transfer of vocal ability to go from the wretched putrid sound to then the look out, and warn everyone down tailgating 4 stories below that there is this rain shower coming of recycled natural light. It was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. And I thought to myself, this place is just – now, I'm not saying that's exclusive to SEC football.
Sure.
But it's just a different environment. It's a different animal. And there is, again, the suggestion of branding for college football analysts and experts that kind of an environment – on a schedule, game in and game out, and especially when you throw in now, like Alabama went and lost at Vanderbilt, which is supposed to be the cakewalk of the SEC. So now you can officially say, well, there's no cakewalks, right?
Yeah.
So the thought is that if you are LSU or you are Tennessee and you have multiple losses, that still came in dealing with more hostile environments each and every Saturday than it is having to go and play at Illinois or a Minnesota or a Purdue, no disrespect, in the Big Ten itself. The perception is that the Big Ten has coast weeks and the SEC does not. I'm not saying it's true, but that's just reality, right?
Yes.
But we'll see what happens. Again, we're going to talk Austin Meek from The Athletic talking about Michigan, going to join us here coming up in just a couple of minutes, and we'll find out. Because Michigan's been a little down, right, Jimmy? I mean, Michigan, again, it's the branding. A win at Michigan this year – or against Michigan, this year, does it mean as much, or is it just the power of branding?
I mean, it matters on paper to have a quality win because of the power of branding, but the biggest argument about Indiana football this year has been strength of schedule. We talked about it going into the season. The schedule was set up for them to have a really good year. That's why you cannot have 2 losses if you're Indiana, because branding power matters, but the deeper you look at the schedule, the more it's happening nationally right now, the more people will nitpick and say, well, who did they really play?
Yeah, there's no question about it. But we'll talk about it coming up in just a minute. By the way, it is a perfect weekend, at least right now, the weather-wise. Is it supposed to be like this all weekend?
Believe so. High 60 and then high 67 on Sunday.
Perfect weekend to, get a car wash, You go in, make sure the car's looking good. You get the car wash. You probably have, if you're like me, the monthly pass, right? You know, I've got that unlimited pass at the car wash joint.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes on a Saturday, I go like 5 times. I go through and I'm like, there's, I don't know, like there was that one little, and then I go right through again, and right through again, right through again. It's a little bit excessive. Might be a little OCD there. But I make sure that I take care. I know. No, what do you mean? I take very good care of myself, Eddie. Thank you very much.
You definitely do not fixate on things either.
Are you guys starting to do the group therapy that Derek Schultz invited you to a couple of years ago?
He was so kind when he offered that
That's
up
right.
to us.
But either way, if you're going into Jiffy Lube and you are one of those that has the car wash pass on your car, just simply point to it when you go into Jiffy Lube, mention it to the team member, and they're going to say, you know what? I respect that. You care about the outside of your car. We're going to make sure that the inside and underneath the hood looks just as good. Because if you go in right now until the end of the year, you're going to get $20 off a signature service oil change and a free tire rotation at Jiffy Lube just by letting them know that you are a member of any monthly car wash program. That's correct. Simply point it to them when you pull in and they're going to go in, they're going to pop the hood, they're going to change the oil, they're going to rotate the tires, and they're going to save you $20. Now until the end of the year from Jiffy Lube, which is your one-stop shop when it comes to, of course, all your vehicle maintenance needs, and you never need to make an appointment. Austin Meek, Athletic, Michigan, talking Wolverines in Indiana next. The Hoosiers of Indiana, whoever would have guessed, maybe it's time for us to extinguish that phrase of like, how did we get here? But we knew that Curt Cignetti was going to be able to turn things around. I told you at the beginning of the year, I was like, look, I'm all in. I think Indiana's going to be really good. I'm all in. Anybody who tells you at this point that they expected or anticipated that the Hoosiers were going to be facing the possibility of going into double-digit wins while still unblemished on the schedule would be lying to you. There's no way that anybody thought
I saw it coming, Jake.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, when you asked me earlier this year if I would be playing in the Rose Bowl, or as just in UCLA, I told you they would be playing in the Rose Bowl.
Okay.
Duh.
Mm-hmm. Do you have audio of that?
Soothsayer,
Oh yes,
Eddie
I'll
Garrison.
go back and find it.
I'm sure you do. But I also think that there was a lot of expectation that Michigan would be in a better situation than they are. But what does it mean with Michigan now coming into Indiana? Joining us now in the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, a guy that covers the Wolverines for The Athletic. He is a return guest to the program, which we appreciate. Austin Meek joins us. Austin, I will begin, and I appreciate the time with this question. Coming off the loss to Oregon for Michigan, they're kind of limping their way into Bloomington. What has been, other than just roster attrition, what's been the biggest difference from last year to this year in terms of why they have not been able to sustain at the upper level of the conference the way we thought they would?
I mean, I think you have to start with the roster and the number of key players that Michigan lost from that national championship team, especially on offense. They lost 10 starters from that championship team on offense, and they lost some really key pieces of the defense. So I think that's where it starts, but that's not the whole explanation because there's still talent on this team. I think that's been one of the most mystifying parts to me of this season for Michigan is especially on defense. If you look at the players they had coming back, Will Johnson, Mason Graham, Josiah Stewart, I mean, they had talent on that defense. They just haven't played up to their capabilities. And I think you do have to look at the new coaching staff and ask, have all the pieces fit together? With Sherrone Moore as the head coach, Kurt Campbell as the offensive coordinator, Wink Martindale coming from the NFL to be the defensive coordinator. I think overall you'd have to say that this team has not played up to its capabilities. And that's not a great reflection on this first-year coaching staff.
When you look at it, Austin, for Michigan coming in, if you're Curt Cignetti, for example, and I don't know, maybe Indiana's strength, quite frankly, Austin, is that they are a team that doesn't necessarily try to exploit the weakness of the opponent, but rather, here's what we're going to do, and it's worked, and we're just going to do what we do and not worry about what's on the other side. But if Curt Cignetti truly does break down film of the opponent like any coach would do, though, but say, the area we're going to exploit is this. We're going to alter our game plan to take advantage of the Achilles of Michigan, which is blank. It would be what?
Well, I think the weakest part of this Michigan team is the passing game, the quarterback, and wide receivers. They just have not effectively really established any type of threat in the passing game outside of Colston Loveland. If Colston Loveland's not catching the ball, there's really not anybody on this Michigan offense that's going to scare you. And so we've seen teams do that. We've seen teams basically say, we're going to dare Michigan to win one-on-one matchups on the outside against man coverage, and we're going to commit to stopping the run because we don't think Michigan has the quarterback or the wide receivers to be able to beat us through the air, and that's proven to be the case. Michigan just has not been able to establish anything in terms of a consistent downfield passing game. So I'd expect Indiana to do the same. Take away the running game, take away Kalel Mullings, who started really hot this season but then has really been held in check the last couple weeks. Try to make Davis Warren at quarterback make throws to somebody other than Colston Loveland because Michigan just hasn't shown that they can do that.
Austin Meek is our guest. He covers Michigan athletics for The Athletic. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. IU hosting Michigan tomorrow at 3:30. Austin, I think back to about a month and change ago when Michigan's able to outlast USC, and it felt like that could be a turning point game for them in the season. They're able to extend that to a win over Minnesota, but then they stumble against Washington, they stumble against Illinois, and then Jake already mentioned that loss to Oregon last weekend. going back to the Michigan game to now, what has changed about this roster? Where has there been growth, and why weren't they able to bottle up that game against the Trojans into a really turning point moment for the season?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that broke Michigan's way in that USC game that didn't really seem very sustainable. I remember even at the time thinking that Michigan was really fortunate to win that game without any kind of downfield passing attack. At that time, Alex Orji was the starting quarterback for Michigan. That was one of the games where Kalel Mullings really went off. I mean, he had a 60-yard run in the fourth quarter when Michigan's offense basically was doing nothing, and that allowed Michigan to score the go-ahead touchdown. But if you looked at that game, really, there were some warning signs even in that win that it was going to be hard for Michigan to sustain that and to beat Big Ten teams without a passing game, and that proved to be true. When they went out on the road the next week against Washington, they really struggled and ended up making a quarterback change to Jack Tuttle, and then Jack Tuttle started at Illinois, some of the same issues. Then he got hurt and medically retired, and then they had to go back to Davis Warren. But really, it's just it's really hard to win in the Big Ten when you're a one-dimensional offense. And Michigan was able to do that against USC, but they haven't been able to really repeat that. And they're still kind of a one-dimensional offense, but unfortunately, the running game has also tailed off. So right now they're kind of a no-dimensional offense, and that's not a very pretty thing to watch a lot of the time.
The who is Austin Meek. The where is the Express Pro Tire on Auto Guest Line. And the what is he is the writer for Michigan Athletics for The Athletic. Austin, were you – obviously we all were, okay? But I want the outside perspective. You covered a team that won a national championship in Michigan, but we knew all year long last year that Michigan was going to be really good. At what point of this season, and maybe we aren't even there yet, did you become convinced that Indiana is the real deal?
I think about halfway through the season, I became an Indiana believer. I can't quite put my finger on a moment. Certainly when Curtis Rourke went down and they were able to still keep winning, I mean, that was a moment for me where I realized, like, there really is something to this Indiana team. And, the way they handled Michigan State, I thought that was potentially a tricky game for Indiana, just because I think that this Michigan State team is kind of a wild card and capable of playing at a high level when Aiden Childs is making plays. So I thought that was a really impressive performance by Indiana to go into East Lansing and win that game the way they did. So I have been converted. I was an Indiana skeptic initially. I think if you look back at our Big Ten season preview, there's probably some things I wrote in there that don't look very smart right now about Indiana, as I'm sure a lot of people did. But, incredible job by Curt Cignetti. I think he's the National Coach of the Year in college football, and I'm not even sure there's a close number two.
He's the National Coach of the Year in the NFL, too. They just decided to give him both. I mean, it's been that good, right?
I wouldn't argue. He's been amazing.
Austin, when I look back at last week's loss to Oregon, they wind up dropping 38 on the Wolverines. Indiana, one of the top teams, in fact, in some rankings, the top teams in terms of efficiency with scoring the football and being able to put up points at will. I know there's a difference, even as good as this season's been for Indiana, in pedigree between Oregon and the Hoosiers. But when you look at Michigan defensively, is this a team, and I know they're 14.5-point underdogs, is this a team that could get 30, 40 points put on them in the blink of an eye like Oregon did a week ago via Indiana?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Michigan's defense right now is teetering on the edge, I would say. They've had some injuries. Will Johnson, one of their best, if not the best player on the team, has been hurt. It didn't sound like there was a ton of optimism that he would be able to go this week, although we don't know. Michigan was down 2 starting cornerbacks against Oregon, and it just feels like that defense is starting to run out of gas. The defense has had to carry the team really this year when the offense was not doing anything and going 3 and out after 3 and out. And it just feels like it's starting to catch up with this defense now, and some of the cracks are starting to get exposed. There is still talent on this defense. I mean, I do go back to that Josiah Stewart is a really disruptive pass rusher. Mason Graham, I still think, is a top 10 pick, even though the defense as a whole has not lived up to expectations. Kenneth Grant is still a really good player on the interior defensive line. So there is still talent on this defense, but it's never really come together at the level that Michigan thought it would. And now at this point in the season, with 4 losses and the injuries starting to pile up, I wonder if this defense is starting to run out of gas.
Hey, lastly, Austin, before we let you go, switching, basketball season is just getting underway, but it is interesting in Michigan because Dusty May's an Indiana guy and, has a lot of supporters here. Pretty good optimism amongst the Michigan fan base just about Dusty May and notably, and I know it takes time, but notably what he can do this year with Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. The only upside for Michigan fans through this really disappointing football season is a lot of them are really excited for basketball season in a way that they haven't been for a little while here, and that's primarily due to Dusty May and just the transformation of the culture of that program from where it was last spring. I mean, it just it had become a pretty toxic situation with Juwan Howard. The team was miserable last year, and in every way, in the record and just in the whole vibe around the program. And it's just been night and day since Dusty May came in. He rebuilt the roster, was able to go in the transfer portal and bring in guys who fit together, play together, have brought a really great energy to the program. People are really excited. I sat down with Dusty over the summer and talked to him about his experience in Indiana and what it's going to be like for him to go back there. That's going to be that's going to be a really interesting game when it comes. But yeah, I think Michigan fans are really excited for both for the long term of what Dusty May can do and also for this season.
Austin, we appreciate the time. We will be looking for the coverage at The Athletic and talking about the Wolverines and Hoosiers from the football side of things, and then probably we'll be talking to you during basketball season as well. Appreciate the time as always. Have a good weekend, all right?
All right. Sounds good, guys. Thank you.
Austin Meek, who joins us from The Athletic. When I think of Michigan basketball and Cleveland State, those two teams, people like, Jake, what is the possible connection between the two? Well, I can tell you, 1986, Indiana had a chance to go in and win the Big Ten. They went to Chrysler Arena to finish the season. They lost to Michigan 80-52. But they were still optimistic as getting, I believe, a 4 seed in the 86 tournament. Turned around, lost in the first round to Cleveland State. First time that night had been bounced in round number 1. Michigan's played 1 game with Dusty May. They beat Cleveland State. I have no idea how my brain works that way and is able to connect those things, yet I can't tell you what I had for lunch like 2 days ago. I have no idea.
People
I just
will study you for years.
I know this much as well. I know that the Colts obviously have Buffalo coming up this weekend, and it's a big weekend in high school football, so Kyle Neddenriep's going to join us bottom of the 1 o'clock hour. Kevin Bowen to talk Colts as well as we roll along on this Feel Good Franciscan Health Feel Good Good for the Heart Friday, which we'll do at 2:30 on The Fan. Jimmy, by any chance, do you drive Capital on your way in?
Sometimes.
So today I'm driving. Somebody, if anybody knows this fella, then tell him I apologize. It wasn't intentional. I'm driving down Capital, and they're doing. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but they've actually in the last 6 weeks, Capitol Avenue has gone from essentially eastern Wyoming to Manhattan, right? And so I'm driving down, and they have, and you get this sometimes because there's some big truck that's, I don't know, it's dropping off pallets of steel or something, and it's halfway across the road. So it's pretty obvious that the road at that point, you're going to have to wait for this truck to clear the way. But they got the guy that's got the sign that has stop on one side and slow on the other, right? So he's standing in front of me with the stop thing, and I'm sitting there waiting, looking at him, and we're doing the awkward stare, right? Hey, how are you? And you're just kind of looking at each other,
Sure.
and he's staring at me. So then the pallet truck starts to move away from the road, and as it does so, the guy holding the sign starts to back up as if he's now opening the lane up. So I'm 20 feet away. I just kind of let my foot off the brake, so now I'm very slowly just kind of inching forward. I'm not going, I'm just kind of inching forward. He jumps up and down 1, 2, 3, and then slams the stop sign with his hand 1, 2, 3, and then points at me 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, and then I felt bad because at first I thought to myself, well, dude, the body language indicated that you were basically opening this up for me. What did you want me to do? And then it dawned on me, this guy probably deals with jackasses that are about to run him over 40 times a day.
Wait
right?
a second. That's who my cousin was talking about?
If you know the guy that's doing the stop slow sign on Capitol at probably, I'm going to say 22nd Street, something like that. No, south of that, 14th Street, somewhere in there.
Is it right by the Starbucks?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I go by that.
Just tell him I apologize.
No.
I didn't, and I didn't know this also. Now, here's a public service announcement for Starbucks people, although if you're a Starbucks person, you already know this.
Yes, I do. I know everything.
Exactly. So when we travel,
Who's we?
Shannon and myself.
Okay, I didn't know if you're talking about IndyCar or...
No. When Shannon and I go on vacation, anywhere that we go, she like you, Eddie, has a Starbucks addiction, right?
I haven't had Starbucks this week. Thank you.
Okay. So we're in Edinburgh,
Hi, Eddie.
Scotland. We're in Edinburgh, Scotland, and we're in Ireland. Now, when you think of Ireland, other than whiskey and beer, what's the beverage that you think of?
Bailey's?
Trying tea.
That'd be Irish coffee, right?
Oh, yeah, I was thinking Irish cream, but yes.
And so when we are everywhere that we go, and this is true anywhere that you travel, there's a Starbucks within 2 feet of where you are, right? Anywhere. Yeah. But in both Dublin and Edinburgh, where we were, the areas where we were staying are lined. It's either a pub, a souvenir store, or a coffee house, an independent coffee house. But in the midst of it, there's a Starbucks. And the Starbucks line's wrapped around the corner, and Shannon's like, we got to go get a Starbucks. And I'm like, this little, you know what I mean? Like Annie's Coffee House that's been here since 1709. We should try that. That might be fun. No, I really like Starbucks. So the one thing, I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm not either. But we were in line, and I got an almond croissant at Starbucks. I think it's really good. It's almond croissant. And then each morning when I'd go and get her, and I can tell you what the whole order is, but when I get it, I would get myself an almond croissant.
Are they fancy about it over there in Ireland, by the way? Like if you're in France, it's a croissant? Like do they say a little
Would her order
style
take
on
up
it
the
or
rest
no?
of the show, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes to Eddie's question. In terms of yours, Jimmy, the difference is this. Any Starbucks that you go into, you go into a Starbucks, and I've done it. You go to Starbucks in Paris, you go to the Starbucks in Amsterdam, you go to the Starbucks in Luxembourg City, you go to any of them, you're getting waited on by a guy that just graduated last year from UTEP.
Okay.
Every time, right? So to answer your question,
so there's no dialect. It is
correct.
American Starbucks
Correct. You walk
employee,
up
isn't
and you're
there?
like, bonsoir, and the guy's like, yeah, man, listen, I'm from Covington. Okay. So, but the other day I decided to stop at Starbucks here because I thought I really did like that almond croissant. So I pull up, and the voice comes out from over the, thank you for coming to Starbucks. What can I get for you? And I said, yes, I don't see it on the menu, though. I'd like an almond croissant. Excuse me? I'd like an almond croissant, please. We discontinued those in 2017. Okay. So apparently Europe's a little slow to get the menu updates. But the almond croissant was very, very good, right?
It's like, I can't think of one on the top of my head, but it's like ordering something from like the French McDonald's menu stateside. They're like, no, I'm sorry, man, we don't make that here.
Exactly. I mean, and now I will tell you that when I was in everywhere that I've been in Europe, I go into McDonald's just to see if they have a Royale with cheese. And that apparently is a fake line from Pulp Fiction because I've never seen the Royale with cheese, for what that's worth. Colts in action, taking on the Bills on Sunday. Who's in, who's out? We'll look at that next. So the Colts and Buffalo Bills coming up on Sunday at Lucas Oil Stadium. And there's been a lot of question about some of the different players in terms of availability. I would like to know this as well.
What would you like to know, Jake?
I would like to know for the fan base, and people can chime in here at 239-1070. I'd like to hear from you fans on this. It's a call to action to go ahead and shout out your thoughts on the Colts in terms of today. And by that I mean, have you reached the point in the year where either A, you have punted on the year and you are strictly looking towards what pieces you have to build around moving forward and, like on to next season type thing? Or B, are you still hoping that they can right the ship because the middle of the AFC is still so wide open that they can find their way into the postseason? I heard Jeff Saturday saying, and he's right, that the problem they have right now is, so you can go with Flacco and win games or whatever, and then you draft 20th.
Purgatory, baby.
Right. I mean, it's the vat of suck, right?
It's like the Pacers. I keep making that analogy.
Yeah. I mean, the Pacers went through that for a long time. The difference being that the Pacers were at least, I guess, for the last 10 years, this wasn't the case. But for a long time, though, the Pacers were drafting outside of the top 10, but it's because they were really good and they were staying competitive as opposed to just miring through in mediocrity. But I'd like to know from people their thought right now on where things are, because we haven't necessarily opened that up. Yesterday, Austin reached out to me because he's got people on the case of trying to find me the Hop House 13 beer. And throughout it, he said, one of my favorite things is get to know your listener. I said, well, kids love that.
Oh, it's been great.
So when you hear the sounder, which, of course, is that of Shout from Tears for Fears, that is always the call to action for people to be able to call in and opine on it. In terms of what you want, or not what you want because you want to see the Colts win, I realize, but what your mindset is. Like, have people already turned the page? Or are you still holding out hope? I don't know, because I was gone, and it just feels like this weird kind of floating in between from one to the next, right?
And the more they go down this road of staying alive in their mind for a playoff spot and them convincing themselves they're going to make noise in the postseason.
The Bee Gees.
I just don't, exactly. I don't see it occurring that way because of the top of the conference is so much better than they are. But the more you go along this road to mediocrity, the further away you get from the Titans, the Jets, the Dolphins. Right now, you're like, oh man, thank goodness we're not in their situation. Well, when you're not playing your rookie quarterback to see what he is and get answers there, and you're sticking with the veteran Band-Aid because he gives you the better chance to win, you're trapping yourself further along where 3 weeks from now, we look at this conversation and the idea of them letting Anthony Richardson dictate where they go, be it a better draft pick or the playoffs, gets further and further from reality because of what's happening around the AFC. We talk about the top half of the conference. Yeah, you can't get the division probably unless the Texans implode. You're not looking at a good draft pick next year either anymore. And that's why I'm so worried, Jake, about training camp in 2025, because if this season goes the way I think it's going to go, which is they keep Joe Flacco out there, they're just good enough to either make the playoffs or just barely miss, and Anthony Richardson will once again be a 10-start quarterback that no more than you did last summer. They're selling short-term gains to plague the long-term aspects of the franchise. And I don't even mean 4 years from now. I mean next summer. You can't go through this again without clear answers, and that's what they're setting themselves up for to experience, and accountability needs to be had unless they win out. Like if they suddenly catch lightning in a bottle, and some Colts fans, I think, believe that Joe Flacco is capable of doing that for them, we'll see if he's able to right the ship after that horrific performance against Minnesota.
Okay, before we discuss where people are mentally on the year, let's go over who is in and potentially out for the Buffalo game. You know how we do this. I name the player. Eddie Garrison has the list before us of those in terms of practice today. We're doing basically a roll call. Now, if I mention a player and they have not practiced, you will hear this. If I mention a player and they are on the practice field in preparation for the game, you will hear this. And if I mention a player and they basically are Jimmy Hoffa and we have not seen them yet today, then you will hear this. Okay. So here we go. The first is the big one, and that is wide receiver Michael Pittman, who has had a back issue. He also has a boo-boo on his finger. Michael Pittman, in terms of practice today, would be what, Eddie? Okay.
That means no practice at all this week for Michael Pittman Jr.
Second, and this guy is a very important piece. Yes, he has usually played through injury. At times it maybe has limited his effectiveness, but he is still an important domino, if you will. Right tackle Braden Smith, who is dealing with a knee injury. Braden Smith. Ooh, okay. DeForest Buckner is a guy that, of course, came off of the IR. He is one that I don't know that you necessarily would overanalyze if he is not available, because one would assume that there's probably some rep limitation with that. But DeForest Buckner in terms of practice today. Okay. Now, Bernard Ryman. Bernard Ryman was in the concussion protocol, correct?
Correct.
And coming off of that, Bernard Ryman, who has been a very solid player on the left side of the line, we already know that the line has gone with some replacement in the fact that Tanner Bortolini now, and again, his restaurant in Chicago is fabulous. Tanner Bortolini is going to be in at center because Ryan Kelly's on IR. But Bernard Ryman at the left tackle position, is he practicing today, Eddie? Oh, okay. That would indicate probably that Bernard Ryman, one would think, is going to be able to go, right?
Shane said earlier this week that he fully expects Bernard Ryman to be playing on Sunday.
Okay, now, Jimmy, I'll begin with you in terms of the game itself before we open it up at 239-1070 for people to do exactly this. Call to action. We want to know your thoughts on it, and I want to know whether or not people have, psychologically, I know you want to see the Colts win, but are you realistically thinking to yourself they need to win because the AFC is still open in terms of the playoffs in general and the wild card, and it's there within and you want to see them go for it? Or because of the situation at quarterback, the injuries that we talked about and everything else, are people thinking to themselves, okay, the reality is that at this point I've just assumed that we are treading water until we find out the direction heading into next year? Your thoughts first.
I think that Colts fans are dangerously close to that level of apathy that we always get worried about around this time of year, where they're like, okay, I guess maybe they could win this week, but in reality, they're not going to do anything in the postseason, and they're not tanking for a draft pick. So
just got to get there, Jimmy.
Oh, that's fun.
Anything happens.
The Colts are there. Yeah, okay. I understand that mantra. We could, again, revisit a beer bet if we would like, but I think Colts fans are getting very dangerously close to an apathetic viewpoint on this season, Jake, and that is the last thing that you want if you're Jim Irsay, if you're Chris Ballard, if you're Shane Steichen.
One of the things I think that is interesting, obviously, I know that Anthony Richardson was a popular player because he's the franchise quarterback going into the year. Okay? And Richardson, though, the only thing that we knew about Anthony Richardson coming in was that he didn't have a lot of college experience. At one point, he changed a tire for somebody on the side of the road, and so people were like, well, he seems like a nice guy. And he had the injury a year ago. But I've seen this kind of tide turn. Not that there were people against him in any way, shape, or form. But I feel like Anthony Richardson, because we didn't know a lot about him, the people that were rooting for him prior to 2 weeks ago were rooting for him because he was the starting quarterback of the Colts. And the Colts were their team, and they're like, okay, so I'm going to – and this guy's – we haven't had a quote-unquote franchise quarterback since Andrew Luck, and a young player to rally around, and he's intriguing, and he's exciting, and he looks different, and he's a shiny new toy, so I'm all in. But I don't know much about him, right? And now I feel like there's this kind of shift where people are rooting for Anthony Richardson, quite frankly, because I think a lot of people think he got screwed. I think Anthony Richardson has actually become kind of a sympathetic figure now where people are like, you know what, this franchise started to do him wrong. I think they had the same feeling to an extent about Benedict Mathurin. And Mathurin, immediately there was a shift where he started getting the minutes, and that went away quickly in terms of him, Rick Carlisle talking about his defense and his rebounding and kind of challenging him. And that all seems to have worked itself out. And Mathurin, I think we can see, we knew that he was a really good player. We knew more about him. But with Richardson, I'm just going by the messages people send to me, but it seems to me like Anthony Richardson now, this was almost like a rallying cry where he's almost more supported now than he was when he was struggling. Or even before he was struggling.
I mean, that'll happen when you go side by side with the Minshew-Flacco era compared to what Richardson did offensively, and it's a difference of 0.1 points per game, and Richardson is in front with that.
Look, Jim Irsay is on record, and I'm paraphrasing here. Jim Irsay is on record of saying, look, when you draft a young franchise quarterback, you're going to be in a lane for a long time before you stop at the gas station. You're going to be driving for a long time and going through traffic, and you're not rerouting. When you get on Waze and there's a traffic jam and it's like rerouting, and it takes you through some weird crossroad, whatever else, when you have a franchise quarterback, there's none of that. You're wading through all of it. You got to drive through the construction. You got to drive through the traffic jam. You got to drive through a flat tire, and you just keep driving. You just keep driving. You just keep driving. You don't take the alternate paths. And Jim Irsay basically said that. Jim Irsay, not Chris Ballard, not Shane Steichen. Jim Irsay is the one that said, basically, we need you to be patient. And the one group that wasn't patient was the Colts. They were the one group that didn't practice what they preached. They asked for our patience and didn't exhibit it themselves. Eric joins us. What's up, Eric?
Hey, guys. Been a huge Colts fan since moved to Indy in '89. I've seen the really, really bad, the really good, and now 10 years of mediocrity. I'm so tired of losing, and I'm so tired of Chris Ballard. So we're talking like, hey, should we lose out the rest of the year so we get more draft capital? He screwed up draft capital for 10 years. What does that matter? I think I speak for a lot of Colts fans. I'm 61. I'm tired of losing. Can we get him the hell out of here and then get somebody in Hinders that's competent so that we can win?
Eric, I appreciate the call, Eric. I got two questions for you. You ready? Oh, Eric dropped off. Okay.
I could potentially answer half since I'm on the anti-Ballard train like he clearly was, depending on what it is. I'm not as strong of a Colts fan, but I might be able to parse.
Well, the first thing is, do you think Ballard gets more patience from people and I'm not saying Ballard's a bad guy.
Yeah, to be clear.
But the arrogance that he displays at times in the press conferences and we have seen general managers or executives in this town that have been very transparent, and I think Ballard's pretty transparent, truth be told. He just doesn't offer transparency, the opportunity for it a lot.
Yeah.
He doesn't do a lot of press conferences. He does like one at the beginning of the year, one at the end of the year. If he was just had a better approach to it and a more conversational approach to it, would people have more patience? Maybe that's just me because I'm in the rooms of the press conference at times. You know what I mean?
I think that there could be more patience, but even if he was as transparent as possible for the last 5 years, let's shrink it down to 5 years, I think the larger issue is the decisions that have been made, the way the team has been built. I don't know that it buys him any more time, but maybe it's less hostile at this stage, if that makes sense. But I don't think his handling of the local media and his transparency with the fan base would have a drastic impact when it's a results-based business, and most of it is not the way he conducts himself, it's the decisions that he's made.
Chris joins us. Chris, what's up?
Yeah. Hi, just calling in to vent frustration about how the Colts have handled this whole situation. I've been a big supporter of AR since before he got drafted. I went to the Combine to see because I was excited. But being told that we should wait and see how it goes and then benching him after 10 games doesn't support anything because the team, Ballard and company, has not made any moves to make this a win-now roster. So to me, it doesn't make sense to limp our way into the playoffs and get bounced out.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I appreciate it, Chris. Look at Cleveland. Cleveland a year ago had Flacco Magic, right?
Correct.
And so they got into the playoffs, and then the Magic ran out, and they drafted mid-pack. They went back at the quarterback position that they had no more answer on it, and look where they are. Now, here's the thing that I think a lot of people feel. I love this take that someone sent to me because I think it's very, very true. Jake, Richardson might throw a 65-yard touchdown. He might run for 25 yards. Then he might throw an interception. But either way, he's exciting. And Joe Flacco's boring. And there's an element of truth to that. And I think the biggest thing that the Colts need to avoid and guard against is fan apathy. At this point, if they're not going to, and I know that your goal is to win games and build a franchise, but the thing about turning it back over to Anthony Richardson is it does twofold. And only they know better than I realize, what Richardson needs. The Colts know that better than I. If they feel like Anthony Richardson, if the Colts feel like the reason Anthony Richardson is not on the field is because Anthony Richardson needs to grow up, Anthony Richardson needs to do homework, Anthony Richardson needs to mature, Anthony Richardson needs to be dedicated, Anthony Richardson needs to show what he can do as a leader and know when to lead and those sorts of things, and he needs to grow up. If the Colts feel that that's the case, then the Colts should have that meeting with him and then and let the locker room handle it. And then basically just come out and say, we simply believe that this is the best process for Anthony. And they've kind of alluded to that, but they've left it open for scrutiny, and they've left it open for all angles to be examined and explored, and whether or not he's healthy and whether or not this is because of throwing mechanics or maturity or tapping out, whatever it might be. I just don't think they've done him any help here. I think they've kind of done him. They kid-gloved him for too long, and then all of a sudden, when they took the sucker away, they said, well, it's because he was too immature to be able to know when it was time to eat candy and when it was time to eat dinner. Well, yeah, but you gave him a sucker every single time he asked for it, so you know what I mean? They kid-gloved him for too long and coddled him, and then the first time that they said that they showed adversity for it, they took everything away. At least that's the perception. But the biggest thing, I think, is that if the Colts are not going to be competitive, they should at least not be boring. And in a world today where people have a short attention span and there's a billion options out there, the games themselves, you don't want them to be boring. And the way that they can avoid being boring is the same way that they can help Anthony Richardson perhaps progress, and that is to have him play. I think a lot of people feel that way. Eric called back. I had two other questions for Eric real quick. Eric, two other questions for you. You cool with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the first is you said that you have season tickets, correct?
No, we had season tickets for about 15 years and then gave them up a few years back.
Gotcha. Okay, so did you, since giving up the season tickets, have you regretted that at all or contemplated it? And I realize it's an expensive investment, but have you been lured back at any point to contemplate going back to it?
Not at all. And again, to your point, it is expensive, but more so to give 10 weekends out of the year to anything is a real big ask.
Right.
So we did it for a long time and just kind of got tired of it. And the home experience is pretty good these days. Okay.
Secondly, Eric, I'd like to know, we do a little segment on the program called Get to Know Your Listener. We've had a lot of success with it. Kids in particular just love it. Can you play Get to Know Your Listener since you mentioned that you're not a native Hoosier, at least back to your upbringing?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, and the enthusiasm is also appreciated, Eric. You said you're 61 years old, right? 61-year-old Eric?
Yep.
Okay, and does that mean you're still a working man, or you got your eyes on retirement, Eric?
Actually, just retired last year. Had 38.
Congratulations.
Hell yeah.
So,
what line of work were you in, Eric?
Pensions are a good thing. They don't happen much anymore.
You are right about that. They don't. What line of work were you in, Eric?
The industry for 38 years.
Sorry, you broke up. What line?
The insurance industry.
Insurance industry. Okay. Now, Eric, when you said that you moved to Indianapolis in 1989, I would like to know first where you moved from.
Dayton, Ohio.
Okay, Americana. That's true Americana, isn't it? Dayton, Ohio.
Yep. Actually grew up in Van Wert, Ohio, which is about 30 minutes east of Fort Wayne in the northwest part of the state.
And then was it job or was it like, domestic partner, spouse, et cetera, that brought you to Indianapolis?
Job. Got a promotion to move over to our home office.
Okay. And then now that you're a retired fella, you are going to stay in Indy or are you going to move back to Dayton and be back to family and that kind of thing?
So we are going to stay in Indy. My son lives in Plainfield, which is about a half hour away, and we have a 15-month-old grandson, so we will never move very far from him.
All right. Well, Eric, we appreciate it. And I appreciate the candor in terms of your Colts fandom, and I certainly appreciate the fact that clearly the knob on your radio is broken and you've been stuck listening to this show. So we are very appreciative of that.
Hey, one last thing since I trashed Ballard out. Was really a big Steichen fan last year until the Browns game, if you remember the end of the first half of that game, and have really struggled with him this year. He is not making the quarterback better. I don't know why we're trying to make him Peyton Manning when clearly they've got different skill sets. Run the damn ball, right? We have the best offensive line and running back in the game, and that's what Anthony's supposed to do. I was so excited when the combination of he and JT in the backfield and what the pressure on the defense they would do, and they haven't used that all year long.
Yeah,
So,
I think that Shane Steichen, Eric, I appreciate it. There are times with Steichen, while I can appreciate the fact that Steichen is the guy that sits in the lab and is the offensive genius and is a mastermind of coming up with different game plans, I love and appreciate all of that. But at the same time, there are times where I'm like, you know what, can we just go back to Jim Caldwell, who was boring, and just let teams go out and rip off 14 straight wins? I think at times, I remember my dad saying to me once, we were watching a game, and I don't remember what quarterback we were watching. It may have been Manning, which probably a bad one to use as the example here, but we were watching some quarterback make like 17 different audibles, and then he ends up throwing into a double coverage and throws a pick, and my dad said to me, sometimes I just wish that I like watching a quarterback that just goes out there and throws it with a wing and a prayer like a Brett Favre and just is a riverboat gambler, right? And that did hurt Favre as much as it helped him probably. But I think there's an element of truth to that from a coaching standpoint too, of just don't overthink it. Sometimes the answer, when you play trivia and they give you 4 answers and the first one, you're like, oh, that the answer is absolutely Mr. Green Jeans. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Gosh, it might actually be Barty. Hold on. No, go with what your brain first told you, right? Just go with it. Just go with it. And sometimes I think when you overthink it is when you get into trouble. And sometimes I think Shane Steichen is overthinking things instead of strictly going with the obvious. And when you've got a left guard that you're paying $20 million and you got a running back that is one of the best in the league and you've got a 4th and 1, you don't need to throw a flare pass to your backup. Sometimes you just say, you know what, we're going to go where the money is. We're going to go where the bread and butter is. When it comes to high school football, our bread and butter and our money's Kyle Neddenriep, Indy Star. He's next. Sectional finals are tonight around the state. Jimmy, are you doing any games tonight?
Yeah, the Roncalli Royals stay alive. A little parochial rivalry showdown tonight at Roncalli against Chittard. Should be a fun one.
Eddie, yourself?
I've got Pacers and Hornets tonight.
That's right. That game in Charlotte, obviously, correct? Pacers
Yes, sir.
back at Cambridge Fieldhouse on Sunday to take on the Knicks. Before we get to Kyle Neddenriep, I should let everybody know two things here. Number one, because we just mentioned Pacers-Knicks on Sunday, the Colts broadcast will air on this radio station, as it always does, up until the Pacers pregame gets underway. I believe that is it 3:30 or 4:30?
4:30.
4:30. So you can listen to the Colts broadcast up until 4:30 right here on the Fan, and you can listen to the broadcast in its entirety, including through the postgame show on our sister station, Hank FM 97.1. So that is the way that you can be able to listen to the game. As for the game itself, no matter which station you are listening to it, even if you are over on Hank listening to it in its entirety, you will not hear one player's name because, Eddie, if you could please play the breaking news sounder. We know now that wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. has been listed as out for this game. He will not be playing against the Buffalo Bills on Sunday. But plenty of high school football action, as we mentioned, taking place tonight. Joining us now in the Express Pro Tire Auto Guest Line, our friend from the Indianapolis Star, Kyle Neddenriep, joins us. Kyle, you will be featuring what is the primary sectional game that you are covering tonight?
Well, I'll have the Lawrence North Cathedral game at Lawrence North tonight. That'll be number 1 versus number 7 in 6A, and should be a fun game. LN obviously has been through every gauntlet of a schedule so far, but they've never beat Cathedral in the tournament. It's only 4 times, but nonetheless, it was a Cathedral win last year, so a chance for LN to try to avenge that game and move forward.
The Lawrence North story, and you tell me, I mean, I could be totally wrong here, Kyle. Like, they obviously have been outstanding this year and have really separated themselves. Was that completely anticipated going into the year, or has it just kind of been over the course of the season that are they kind of like the Indiana, if you will, of the high school rank?
That's a good. I mean, there's more to this story. I've written about it a few times. Pat Mallory. When he first got there, came from Center Grove, where he coached with. Actually, he came from Knightstown, but he previously coached under Eric Moore at Center Grove. Talked to Eric Moore about taking this job. And they were really down at the time, and they were for a few years. When he first got there in 2013, they. I think. Have to look at 4 or 5 losing seasons in a row, maybe even 6, and then finally got it turned around. And, the last few years, they've been really solid, 7-win teams the last couple of years. They finally broke through and won a sectional in 21 for the first time since the 1990 team. I believe it was 90 or 91, right in there, but it's been a long time. And, so this was kind of been building, this type of season's been building, towards this. I actually picked them to win this sectional before the season, thinking it would be, Cathedral losing some talent from last year, but still kind of thought that was maybe a little bit of an upset pick. But, the way they've played this year, they are so fast. I think and we kind of knew their offense would be really good. We didn't know, maybe as much about the defense, but, that side of the ball has been really good. They're not a huge team necessarily, but very fast and, play at a tempo that they like to play. Not to say they can't. They're a really good running team. The thing about them, I think, is they don't have many weaknesses. They can run, they can throw. They've, like I said, played good defense. They have a good special teams, a good kicker. So all those things necessary to win. If they had Warren on their jerseys, we probably would have thought this, before the season, or Ben Davis or whatever. But LN just hasn't been that level. So I think maybe slightly more skeptical than we should have been, but they're really good. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to beat Cathedral. Cathedral's they're getting healthy. They're definitely better than they were early in the year. It's going to be a semi-state type of game tonight, I think. But yeah, this has kind of been building, and it's been a dream season for sure, but not totally out of nowhere, I would say.
Sectional final Friday across the state of Indiana. Indy Star's Kyle Neddenriep covering it all. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Kyle, ordinarily I save any questions about Roncalli for special occasions because I went there and I don't want full bias, but this is their oldest rival in Bishop Chatard. They played them basically every year since 1969. It is one of the classic rivalries around the state, and it's a regular season rematch tonight. Chatard won the regular season meeting 9-3. You have Roncalli winning 20-17 in your write-up. Why do the Royals etch a W in the latest chapter of this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a great game, and I would expect it. I don't think it'll be as low scoring, but I do think it has a chance to be, relatively low scoring. And I just like the way, having watched Roncalli last week and actually twice this year. And again, they were playing Brebeuf, and Brebeuf not great defensively, but I just feel like with Colin Ash and Zach Dozier in that running game, and then, they've been really good defensively, and they've played it's always kind of the case for teams like Roncalli and Chatard where they play teams that are maybe even above their weight class and normally handle themselves really well. So maybe their record of 6-4 might not stick out to you, and they're not like the team a few years ago where they had this massive offensive line. They've got smaller guys, which, but still a very good line, and it feels like they've kind of got some things figured out on the offensive side as well. And picking up a win over East Central late in the year, I think that was kind of an eye opener. East Central not what they were the last couple of years, but still a very good program. Now playing in 5A, but yeah, I kind of feel like they maybe know who they are a little bit more. They've been able to use both quarterbacks. Jaden Buchanan came in last week, and I thought gave him a nice, made some nice plays there in the passing game, and then special teams has been really good too. Field goals and I thought there was a couple nice. Rudy Shotley had a couple nice punt returns, or one in particular I can remember to kind of set up that field goal at the end of the half. So I just feel like there's a lot of confidence there. And again, I'm not totally, Chatard could very well. That's sort of an upset pick, I would think. But, this Chatard team maybe not quite as veteran as last year. And that's a team that doesn't come around often, that went undefeated and kind of rolled through, the 3A playoffs. They weren't even really tested last year. So this is maybe not that dominant of a team, but I think people have kind of been looking forward to maybe seeing Chatard, New Pal in the next round of the tournament. But I think this one's going to be just as good of a game. And I kind of gave the edge to Roncalli, in part because they're playing at home, and I know that doesn't always make the biggest difference, but I think in a game like this it could.
Joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line, it is Kyle Neddenriep from the Indianapolis Star. Kyle, a couple of teams that to me are the traditional powers that have kind of had ebb and flow seasons. And I want to know if, maybe things are coming together for them at the right time, because Warren, Ben Davis, Center Grove, all three of them, obviously Center Grove's been really good, but I'll begin with Ben Davis. I think Ben Davis at the beginning of the year, we thought typical traditional Ben Davis, they're going to be one that's going to be towards the top of the rankings all year long. They've kind of had some valleys. But now taking on Brownsburg, who, if I'm not mistaken, also has had kind of peak and valley year. Between those three, we'll throw Brownsburg into it as well. Which one do you think is actually playing their best football at the right time?
I think Warren, out of those teams, is maybe the best, playing the best right now. Again, you kind of look for teams that, who has kind of figured out who they are, and I think Warren's maybe figured out they're more of a running, they've been able to run the ball better here later in the year. They got a really nice win against Cathedral. I like the way they got kind of punched in the mouth against Lawrence North. I covered that game in early October, and Lawrence North really put it on them. It was 33-7. But then Warren bounced back. They beat Carmel, beat Cathedral, and then their sectional's not quite as strong as some others, so they could kind of get geared up for likely playing Center Grove next week in the regional, which, that's kind of been the hump they haven't been able to get over the last few years. But, I just feel like defensively, they've been really good for the entirety of the season. But I think on the offensive side, starting to get it going too. But all three of those teams are dangerous to me. And I feel like Ben Davis is also starting to play its best football right now. And Brownsburg's kind of, it seems like every year they have to go over there to Ben Davis and play for just how the bracket works out, and they've got to do that again. And they did beat them once in the tournament a couple of years ago, but it's kind of been their problem spot is getting past Ben Davis, which is a problem for a lot a lot of programs. But they're 1-6 in the tournament all time against BD. I don't think, honestly, and both these teams are really good and could end up going all the way. I feel like last year both those teams were probably better than they are this year. Just based on graduation and things. And Brownsburg's got some really good young players, too, some sophomores, so I think they're going to be better in the future. But it's probably a team that is even overachieved to a certain extent this year, and we'll see how they perform against BD. That, to me, that's maybe there's so many great games and matchups. That's one game I don't have a great feel, for how that game's going to go. I see a wider variance maybe in how that one could go than some of the others tonight. But yeah, and then Center Grove's got Franklin Central, which Franklin Central's better this year too, and maybe this is a year where they can get by Center Grove. That's been kind of their hump they're trying to get over too. But Center Grove, November Center Grove is normally a good recipe that they'll I'm sure play well tonight. But I wouldn't count out Franklin Central either.
Now, Kyle, I'm going to let you and the listeners in on a little bit of kind of a traumatic experience for me today, admittedly. I walked in the studio today, and Eddie Garrison, I had never seen anything like it since I saw the episode in Seinfeld with Putty going to the hockey game. I caught Eddie was painting his chest with the Decatur Central logo, which was a little uncomfortable and gelatinous, to say the least. But he was telling me he's excited because they're taking on Plainfield. And so I just kind of, even though I'm trying to get that image out of my mind, I did feel compelled to ask about Decatur Central since Eddie's sitting here and is a proud alum. So Decatur Central Plainfield, the Kyle Neddenriep forecast is what?
Well, this will be a fun game too. I mean, and it's a contrast of styles. Decatur so fast. Casimir Hicks, one of the fastest players I would say in the state of Indiana. I mean, he gave Plainfield trouble last time. But I covered Plainfield's game against Martinsville a few weeks ago, and their offensive line is big. They really want to run the ball, and Mark Bless, his assistant for his son there at Plainfield, Tyler Bless, who's been their coach the last couple of years, and their motto is sort of run the damn ball. So that's what they're going to try to do, and last time they played Decatur, they did run it pretty well, but they turned it over. They fumbled 3 times and kind of gave Decatur, some shorter fields to work with. But I don't know, Decatur's so explosive. I just feel like they're the most talented team in 5A. I think this might be the year where they can go. They've been there a couple times to the state finals and lost. I think this might be the year they can get through, and this might be their toughest. I think the winner of this game will be playing at Lucas Oil at the end of the month here. So it's just a matter of which one of the two it's going to be. And I picked Decatur, but I do love the contrast of styles here. And these are conference rivals. They know each other really well. But I just feel like Decatur's kind of been there and done it and maybe has a little bit more experience in these type of games.
Indianapolis Star, IndyStar.com, where you can read Kyle's work covering all of the games tonight. Those that we mentioned, there are plenty of them of note. Fisher's HSE is going to be obviously a big one. Perry and Warren, we talked about Zionsville and Westfield. That's just 6A. So all over the place. Bloomington North and South, the Star will have all of it covered. Kyle, we appreciate it as always.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Kyle Neddenriep joining us. You too. When we come back, we mentioned it. Big news for the Colts coming up against Buffalo. How does it change things for them schematically? We'll talk about that, and Kevin Bowen will join us. Top of the hour here on Query and Company on a Friday edition on The Fan. Michael Pittman Jr., not a huge surprise against the Bills for the Colts coming up on Sunday. Again, a reminder, the game itself you will hear in its entirety on our sister station, Hank FM. You will be able to hear the pregame and the game action on this station, The Fan, until 4:30, in which the Pacers broadcast will then take over as the Pacers host the New York Knicks at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. So just that reminder in terms of the radio coverage. But, Jimmy, in terms of for the Colts themselves with no Michael Pittman Jr., typically you would say that means, okay, perhaps you offset that by running more open space pass plays or even deep ball threats. With Joe Flacco, does that change at all, in your opinion, what their design is going to be?
I think a lot of what they've wanted out of Joe Flacco is quick rhythm throws, getting the ball out in an efficient manner, not letting pass rush be a factor in this game, and taking Michael Pittman Jr. off of that when you don't have a true direct tight end in this group, a reliable set it and forget it, easy completion, 5-10 yards type of guy. You're going to need other players to step up, and that includes A.D. Mitchell. He has been the biggest point of criticism in this wide receiver room, taking Michael Pittman Jr. off the board because you admire him playing through the injury. We've discussed where you walk through the line of liability for Michael Pittman Jr. still playing out there when he's at 50% versus him still being beneficial towards the offense. Him out this week, the Colts saying they still have not given any thought to him actually going on the IR. We need other guys to step up. In that role, I would like it to be A.D. Mitchell. He's had moments where it's hit him in the hands or he's been on the right trajectory to go get a completion and he's dropped it. And everybody's looking at him as a rookie wide receiver and asking him to play outside his means. It's not fair sometimes in the NFL. My expectation is always lower for rookie wideouts because there is a learning curve in the different offenses you might be featured in compared to what you were in college. This is simply a next man up type of game for that receiver room that we've given flowers to all year. In order to make up for his absence, it's going to have to be by committee to some extent, but I would like to see A.D. Mitchell leading that charge.
Yeah, the A.D. Mitchell's one that you almost – do you remember when we were at camp how passionate Shane Steichen was to us, both on and off air? And I'm not saying he was wrong.
Wiggle.
But,
Is that the term
yes,
he used?
about A.D. Mitchell's
Brought
just
up Allen
ability
Iverson
to get himself
comparisons.
open. And I know that he's a young player. And I think that we live in such a immediate result-based society that we think that because a guy doesn't automatically start – Jarris Walker's a prime example, right? I'm not saying Jarris Walker all of a sudden is like going to be a player for the Pacers, but we started to wonder when we were going to see it. And then we remind ourselves of his age and everything else, and maybe now it is starting to come, and maybe he does work himself into the rotation. For A.D. Mitchell, I think there was the thought process immediately that, like, this guy was going to be a wide-open slot receiver, like, right from the get-go, and was going to be basically Josh Downs. We got a little bit spoiled with Josh Downs, right? And our expectations for player changed a little bit or were mandated by Josh Downs, and we thought the same of A.D. Mitchell. And it hasn't really taken off yet. I think we're a little bit also jaded on the other side of it by the fact that A.D. Mitchell is one that when he came in, that the conversation about him or the whispers about him through the combine was that he was a very talented player that had red flags in college that held him back from reaching his full potential collegiately. And so, therefore, when he gets off to a slow start at the professional level, you wonder if, in fact, that same thing is not coming into play. It may have – one may not have anything to do with the other. But when you are told something repeatedly about a guy, then you start to wonder. And the Colts were very, very effusive in their praise of A.D. Mitchell through camp. But so far, we just haven't seen it yet, right? I mean, we haven't seen with regularity and with consistency, I mean.
And it starts to go back to the conversation we had a season or two ago about struggles at wideout. At what point were we given fool's gold to start the year? Is Michael Pittman Jr. that critical to this offense where at times people have labeled him as only a wide receiver one by name? I know he finally got the compensation for it, but is that wide receiver room that thin, that paper tigery, if you will, that you put Michael Pittman Jr. out there at 50% and there's not enough production to offset it?
Remember how
it's
they
a
looked
larger
against
issue with the
Atlanta?
offense as well.
Remember how they looked against Atlanta last year without him?
Yes.
They couldn't move the ball.
Yes. But at that point, we were fully critical of, hey, they should have done more at wideout. They should have done more to fix that. And you thought with a leap forward with Josh Downs, a healthy Michael Pittman Jr., and A.D. Mitchell being the player that Shane Steichen thought he was going to be out of the gate, that those problems were now resolved. And now it feels like it's just more of the same.
Kevin Bowen joins us next. Good for the Heart Friday coming up, bottom of the hour. Thanks to Kyle Neddenriep, who joined us a little bit earlier talking high school football today. Also, Indiana and Michigan taking place at Memorial Stadium tomorrow. And that's obviously a big one in terms of the college football playoff landscape because the Hoosiers, again, at 8th. And I think it's an interesting discussion, Jimmy, of if Indiana loses to Michigan at home, are they out? Can they get themselves back into the mix with the win? I mean, a lot of it depends upon what happens around them, right? But if Indiana drops to Michigan and Ohio State, are they still in if it's close both ways? I don't think so, personally.
I don't either. And because at some point, you talked about brand equity earlier, but it's half brand equity, half strength of schedule. If you drop both of the big marquee games on your schedule, which would be Michigan and Ohio
Correct.
State, you lose both of those, you can't fight the committee on conversations about, well, not only did they not play anybody, but they have 2 losses. You need to win at least one of those games.
To me, if they beat Michigan, barring a blowout, and when I say blowout, I'm talking 56-3.
Yeah.
If they beat Michigan, I think they're in.
I agree.
I think even if they beat Michigan and they narrowly are beaten by Ohio State, I think they're in.
I agree. I mean, I would even go a step further based on people we've talked to. I'll sweat it a bit, but I think they're still good, even if Ohio State wiped the floor with them, just because it's a Power 5 team, and there's not a ton of one-loss teams, Jake, that are on the outside looking in. That's in Indiana's favor as well. You don't have a ton of mix. The rest of them are mainly 2-loss teams sitting behind them. So I think either way, as long as you just have one loss on the resume, you're good to go.
Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, you hear him in the mornings, of course, with Andy Sweeney on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy. Kevin Bowen joins us. Kevin, let's get right to this. We were just talking about it. We now know officially what we suspected. No Michael Pittman Jr. coming up on Sunday for the Colts. How does, if at all, that change, I guess, just schematically what Shane Steichen might offensively try to do?
Yeah, the answer probably is different just considering how Pittman Jr. has looked over the last month. I respect the hell out of him fighting through the injury. I don't know if it should change too much schematically. I thought even before today's news that you just needed to have a long and hard conversation with him about, hey, man, we respect you like no other, and you just signed a contract and you're fighting through an injury that probably should put you on injured reserve. But we got to trim that playing time. They actually trimmed it on Sunday a little bit for Pittman. He's usually pretty much out there every snap, and he played 75% on Sunday. So I think, AD Mitchell and Ashton Doolin are the 2 names that come to mind. I know certainly Mitchell's the one with more of the flash and the curiosity given the second-round pick, and he did, have a huge catch on Sunday night. So I would think to, look in both of those guys and probably an expanded role for each of them.
Kevin, you just left the complex. Kevin Bowen, our guest. You talked to Cam Turner, the Colts quarterback coach, about Anthony Richardson. Let's begin with this. Can you kind of paraphrase for us what things were said?
Yeah, to be honest with you, not much. I just think it starts with Shane Steichen probably, but, in particular Jim Bob Cooter and Cam Turner, his position coach and his OC, it just seems like guys are, maybe a tad on eggshells and just wanting to be as transparent as possible with describing the reasons for why Anthony Richardson is no longer playing. Because, again, you point to last season and his numbers were a lot better than they were this season. So, why the dip? Is it shoulder related? You kind of just throw all those questions out there. And, again, I don't think we've gotten a ton of clarity or transparency from really anyone. And, you go back to Shane Steichen's words last week, and it's, hey, we want him to be a professional. And, it says that word 3 or 4 times. Okay, what exactly does that mean? Is it Monday through Saturday? What do you want to see out of them? It really seems like they're in a position now that, there's only so much he can do to earn it back. It's more of probably what Joe Flacco, is unable to do. I would say that would be the only reason that they would turn back to Anthony Richardson before the year's over.
Is there part of you, Kevin, as you look at the other side of the field with the Bills and their injury report, knowing there's not going to be Keon Coleman, who's been a nice rookie for them the last couple of weeks. Amari Cooper is questionable. I understand it's still Josh Allen on their side of the field, and he is as dynamic a quarterback as you're going to find. But where does your overall vibe on the Bills offense change without Coleman and potentially without Cooper this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, they are pretty banged up at wideout. I think even Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, a couple other wideouts are on the injury report. So the thing about Allen that makes him just so good, and certainly we saw it firsthand in that playoff game a few years ago, I mean, it just seems like at the last second he makes some plays that it's just like, how the hell did he make that work? Like, I mean, if you freeze frame it, 3 seconds earlier, it looked like a sack. It looked like a huge play for the defense, and now the chains are moving, and Buffalo's back in rhythm. So I really have to say, like, okay, is timing off just by a hair second with maybe some of these other wideouts being thrust into bigger duty into those roles? Because as dominant as they've been from a point differential standpoint, there's still a lot of areas you can point to that they're just kind of average in. So I am curious how that will affect them. And then I think psyche-wise, next week they've got your Chiefs, Jimmy, and, to Buffalo, I think you could make the Colts-Patriots analogy from, a couple decades ago to, that game meant more to the Colts than the Patriots, I think, as the years moved along. I think this one means more to the Bills than the Chiefs, just considering the inability to get over the hump there. So human instinct, is there any of that? Sandwiched in between a divisional game that they won on a 61-yard field goal and the marquee game of the year with Kansas City leading into their bye week, do they overlook Indy at all?
Kevin, do you believe let's do this in a couple of questions, I guess. The first, if you had to crystal ball it, the target that the Colts are looking at on when they could hand the keys back to Anthony Richardson is A, sometime in the near future, B, not again this season, or C, they don't necessarily know the answer to that?
Yeah, again, I think it's going to have to take a stretch of just really poor play from Flacco. I am curious, like, if they don't get a win in their next three, which is Buffalo, at the Jets, and the Lions, I mean, you aren't mathematically eliminated, but, I mean, hell, you're, 4-8 at that point? I mean, it's going to be very unlikely. So, do they go there? Their bye week, for what it's worth, would be one game after that. They would have the Patriots, and then their bye week, do you get back from the bye? And, again, if you're 5-8 or 5, do you go back to Richardson? So I'm still not, slamming the door shut on Richardson getting back in the lineup this season. But, again, I just don't know if there's really anything he can do off the field. I think it's going to have to take more bad Joe Flacco performances and or losses for the Colts to decide to go, back to Richardson. So I think it's important they do it before the end of the year, or else, I think no matter what, it's going to be a rather awkward offseason for Richardson. But I think it'll be very, very awkward if you don't turn back to him yet.
Kevin, do you think
he's the starter going into 2025?
Do you think what they're hoping that he learns here is what all, like, hey, now that you're not the starting quarterback, we want you to simply shadow Joe Flacco and see everything that goes into what the starting quarterback does week to week to prepare? Or is it, hey, we want you to watch what Joe Flacco's doing with his feet because it didn't seem to register what you needed to do from a football standpoint on the field, and so we need you to watch and learn from that? Or is it C, which is you've been a bad boy and we're putting you in the control chair?
I think it's mostly the Monday through Saturday that's necessary to play well on Sundays and to be a quarterback of an NFL franchise, a captain, those sorts of things. I'd point to that. I think it's impossible for Anthony Richardson right now in practice to truly grow physically as a quarterback. In training camp, for those that were out there, he didn't throw a ton of picks. He was actually pretty accurate compared to where he was at training camp the year before. And yet, when the games have rolled around, he obviously hasn't played well. So, again, I think there's only so much, you can actually rep and improve on in practice as the backup. Flacco said this when he took over the starting job. He's like, you get no reps as the backup quarterback in the NFL. Frankly, I think it's one of the more, misconceptions, if you will, of, exactly what a backup quarterback, does in an NFL practice. It's hardly any reps. And it's scout team stuff. It's like, Anthony Richardson mimicking Joe Flacco, not even running the Colts playbook in there. So I think it is much more to do with, the quarterback standards, the Monday through Saturday aspect of it. Watch all the intricate details, watch the amount of hours, watch that work go into play. And then, when your number's called again, hopefully that'll be kind of ingrained into your weekly routine.
Do you think if Richardson lacks maturity, Kevin, is that an age thing, or is that goes into I haven't been a starter at a football level, at any level, as the quarterback for long enough?
Both. Yeah, I would say both. I mean, unlike a guy like C.J. Stroud or even like a Kyler Murray, Richardson didn't really grow up in, I think, this immense quarterback culture that I feel like a lot of these guys now grow up in. I mean, it's changed a lot. And, the last name of Manning obviously created Peyton to be in that culture from an early age. But I think, since Peyton and Brady and those guys, I mean, there's now much more of a quarterback climate. I mean, hell, you got quarterback coaches all over central Indiana that, really drill these guys and, teach them how to play the position. And I don't think Richardson was as much kind of immersed in that culture. And then obviously look at Billy Napier at Florida right now. It's not like it's gone very well. So you could argue how much great coaching he's gotten there. So, sure, his overall age, definitely. There's probably just a general level of maturity that's necessary. But I would say, playing the position itself. And again, everything that goes into it. And if you want to go back to the last game he played against Houston, and don't talk about the tap out. Like him not running out of bounds on the final drive, the first scramble. I mean, he gets a 20-yard scramble to start that final drive. That is a great first play. But yet he decides to take on a DB, and not only is that not smart for him health-wise, he didn't get out of bounds. And that wasted 15, 20 precious seconds of, trying to get into Matt Gay's field goal range. And so, that was just a huge, huge moment there. And again, that's part of playing quarterback. You go to the end of the first half. Yeah, I didn't think Shane Steichen put him in a good position on the 3rd and 3 after he nearly threw a pick. But, instead of Anthony thinking to himself, hey, I've had an awful first half, here's my chance to redeem myself, that's a moment, I think, where you say, all right, let's swallow my own pride here. Let's get into halftime. Let's regroup. I know we get the ball. It's a tie game. It's not the end of the world. Again, I think those are kind of like quarterback maturity moments that he could, do well to improve on.
Kevin Bowen is our guest. You hear him on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, 7 to 10 a.m. on these very airwaves. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Kevin, when you look around the AFC, Jake and I were discussing this earlier. I mean, it's clear there's a separation between where the Colts are and the tops of the AFC, like the Chiefs, like the Bills, like the Ravens. But there's also a clear gap for them between the likes of the Jaguars and the Patriots and the Titans. And it leads to this road of mediocrity and purgatory that we talk about. As you look at what happened last night to Cincinnati, as you're mapping out the rest of this, where is the margin for error for this team if they're legitimate about getting to the playoffs? I know so much of it is outside of their control, but where is the margin for error in a schedule that will get considerably lighter here in a couple weeks in an AFC whose 5 to bottom of the conference seeding is relatively trash?
Yeah, so they got 8 to go. I think 5 and 3, as long as the 5 wins include Jets next week and Broncos, both of those road games in December. As long as they include those two, if they go 5 and 3 and beat those two teams, I'd be rather stunned if they didn't make the playoffs, just given how the standings look. I mean, again, it's probably a little premature, Jimmy, to commit to playoff teams at this point, but let's call all the division leaders. Let's just say they'll all win their division. Buffalo, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Houston, and Kansas City. Let's call Pittsburgh a playoff team. Let's call the Chargers a playoff team. That last wild card spot comes down to, Broncos, Colts, Bengals. That was a huge loss last night for Cincinnati, and good news for the Colts.
Yeah, it's the first thing I said today, right? That was big for the Colts.
Huge. Yeah, huge. Yeah. And then Denver would be the other team that you'd throw into that mix there. So you're going to have opportunities to play the Jets next week. And again, I know a lot of people, might want to call this one a must-win. And sure, it's a huge game, but if you really are labeling 2 games the rest of the way as must-wins, it's at the Jets next week and it's at the Broncos. You get those head-to-head tiebreakers; those could be huge for you in the playoffs. So, yeah, a 5 and 3 record with those two, then I'd be stunned. And really, if you look at the schedule the rest of the way, they're an underdog Sunday. They'll be an underdog in 2 weeks with the Lions. I don't know if they'll be more than a point or two underdog really in any game the rest of the season. So
aren't they kind of trapped in that regard then with the Flacco dice that they've cast? Because if they wind up surviving this last couple games of the gauntlet and the rest of the schedule lightens up, you can't turn the keys back to Anthony Richardson at that point, right? Because you'd be going against what you said your goal was now,
Sure.
which is winning now.
Well, I guess this kind of goes back to Jake's question from earlier. I think what's awkward is if you're waiting for them to be mathematically eliminated before you go back to Richardson, you're going to be waiting a long time. Like, to me, again, 9 wins is where that final playoff spot is going to be. And, I mean, they would have to really lose the next 3, maybe the next 4 to get to a point where you're mathematically eliminated. Teams often point to a bye week as a chance to maybe restart things. Again, their bye week is the latest of any in the NFL, and they have 4 games left after their bye week. So, leading into the bye week, it's the Bills, the Jets, the Lions, and the Patriots. If you go 1-3 in that stretch, you're, again, 5-8. If you come back from the bye week, would you then, opt for Richardson? Are you mathematically eliminated? All those things I think are factors. So, again, for those wanting Richardson to play, you need a stretch of bad Joe Flacco and losses.
Kevin, when you look at the Richardson situation, and Jeff Saturday had interesting comments about this as well. Haven't they misplayed this all the way around? Because literally no matter which way this goes, they're right back to square one next year.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, someone mentioned to me, are they at rock bottom? And I think, 2022, I think, is more of the rock bottom, just the embarrassment level of that season, those losses, all of that. But the light at the end of the rainbow for 2022 was the 4th overall pick. The light at the end of this rainbow is what? The 16th overall pick?
Exactly. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
Sure. And now, if you want to be the internal optimist, you look at the 4 division leaders right now in the AFC. All 4 of them drafted that quarterback, and, only one was a top 5 pick, C.J. Stroud. Allen was 7, Mahomes was 10, Lamar was the last pick around 1. So, you don't have to be, drafting in the top 5 to find those guys, but obviously it takes a lot to trade up, and who knows if this quarterback class even has an answer there, and who knows if they even would want to entertain that. That's what makes this offseason upcoming so awkward. So, yeah, I think that's what kind of adds to the difficulty of where you're at right now. It's the question of what is the plan at the most important position in sports. It's a question we've asked for, I would argue, every offseason over the last 6 years, probably minus this past offseason. The thought, obviously, was Richardson is that answer. And now that question is back on whatever burner you want to place it on, and it has, whatever. Maybe Richardson will resurrect it. But, again, you don't feel overly optimistic about that. And, Justin Fields will come here and revive his career. Minnesota can't have Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy. It's again, all these answers, you just kind of shrug your shoulders, and it's not the ideal answer for, trying to achieve some sort of run of, 5 to 7 years.
To compensate Michael Pittman Jr.'s absence and the lack of confidence across the rest of the wide receivers not named Josh Downs, do you expect a heavy dose of Jonathan Taylor throughout the game?
Yeah, I think yes, I would think so. Buffalo's got real fear of Jonathan Taylor, and probably part of that is PTSD for those that recall in 2021, he had a 5-touchdown, 185-yard game against Buffalo, and, they just dominated the Bills there. And so Buffalo this week, that's been a storyline. Miami ran on them pretty significantly. They've struggled defending the run this season. They've signed a couple defensive tackles. So all of a sudden, all of that, you throw Taylor into the equation, they're scared. Now, in past years, the Colts have had a blueprint to play keep away. When they beat Mahomes their 2 seasons ago, again, you have this little blueprint that they can go to. We just haven't seen that this year. You haven't had the big Taylor ball control game. They've only won the time of possession in 1 game this season. So that's where it's theoretically, the blueprint is possible, but their ability to execute the blueprint is not something we've seen this season. But, I think when you face quarterbacks like this, part of playing keep away is playing complementary football. And so that's just a huge, I think, element to pulling off any sort of upset on Sunday is Taylor, heavy dose, production, keep away, long drives, and that includes Flacco converting third downs, which he didn't do against Minnesota. If you can drum up some sort of recipe like that, then I do think this could be that win that seemingly the Colts find at some point every season where an elite quarterback shows them on the schedule. It might not mean anything for the rest of the year, but for 60 minutes on a Sunday, the Colts are able to get it done.
Kevin, do you feel like at times Shane Steichen offensively outthinks himself?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I brought up, the end of the Houston first half a little bit earlier. To me, that was a moment where, sure, in a great world, your quarterback would realize, hey, if it's not there, just eat it, move on, live to, be into halftime. But, and this is a tough balance for Shane. I mean, you're asking him to be the play caller and the head coach. I think those can be two different mindsets on game day. Like, there are times where, you watch last night, John Harbaugh is the CEO of it. Like what Todd Monken wants to call as the OC is not, I think, what John Harbaugh views as the exact play that needs to be called 60 times out of 60 over the course of a game. Sometimes you don't want to be that risky. Harbaugh realizes, hey, Kyle Hamilton's out, or Cincinnati's a little banged up here. Like, yes, in a perfect world, the analytic chart says do this, but the game is not developed in that way. So we don't need that. And I thought, the Houston game was a perfect example of, Anthony is 2 of 14, just threw a pick on second down. It's a tie game. You get the ball throughout the third quarter. Again, wave the white flag. As the offensive coordinator and as the play caller, you want to be aggressive. Hey, we scored in this exact scenario the previous week. And, again, I don't think it goes apples to apples to it. I get all that. But, again, that's where the head coach hat comes into play and says, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes. You're thinking in a different world over the course of a 35, 40-second play clock than I'm thinking here as the head coach. So I think that is the difficult nature to doing what he's doing. And there are several head coaches around the league that have both of those things on their plate, play caller and head coach. I just think that's the week-to-week balance that can be really hard.
Kevin has posted the video, I believe, of his son's pick of the day. Kevin, do you want to divulge that, or do we simply send people to the X-Post Twitter to find out the results?
No, it's a Friday at 2. People aren't going to be that committed to social media. He picked the Bills. He thought they were the Bildines, so he kept on referring to them as the Bildines and not the Bills, which, I mean, I guess to be fair, he probably has heard the word Bildines more than he's heard the Bills. So, yeah, it looked like for a while there he was going Colts, and then last second he went over to the Bills there. So,
do you think the animal aspect of it impacted it? That's always your theory, is that when you bring the animal mascots into things that –
I thought we've watched Lion King in our household probably 5 of the last 7 nights. So I thought we would, I thought Buffaloes would be on his mind, but he didn't seem to be too preoccupied with that on the side of the helmet there. It was more of, I don't know, maybe, it's a very similar, color helmet to the Colts, of course.
It is.
The white, heavy background, and then, of course, a hint of red there. So, I tried to get in the mind of them, but it didn't seem like it was Buffaloes. It was more of Buildings, which he does love construction books. So I don't know. Maybe Buildings is something that he really gravitates towards.
By the way, do you know why? Do you remember when the Bills? They obviously for years had the red helmets, and then they've done red and white, right? Like over the course of the years. Do you know why? Do you know why originally they changed colors from the white helmets going into a darker red helmet? True story. Joe Ferguson, their quarterback, was colorblind and couldn't tell the difference between colors, and they determined that if they used a darker helmet that it was easier for him to differentiate because he was throwing the ball. He was having problems in his reads of knowing which was defense and which was offense as players were scanning over him. So they did like eye tests with him and realized that if they came up with a darker helmet, it was easier for his eye to differentiate the difference between the two.
How about that? There are times when you pull out such useless information. I want to be like, can we all watch like Shannon and you's like first 2 dates? We all sit there and like just watch it, and an hour in, you're like, I don't know if you love NFL helmets, Shannon, but and you throw that at her, and she's left in awe, and just can't resist Jake Query for the rest of her life.
You know what's funny, Kevin? I look back on this, and this is like she laughs at me now. Our first date, we went to a movie. So basically, our first date, we didn't talk for 2 hours. That's probably why I got a second date, right?
Boy, that might be the smartest decision she's ever made.
You mean the movie, not the second date, right?
Well, yes. Thank you for clearing that up.
All right, Kev, enjoy the weekend. We appreciate the time as always, and we will see whether or not the pick becomes reality for your son. And there's a lot to talk about and a lot to watch for the Colts. I know you and Andy will be covering it bright and early on Monday as well. Have a good weekend, all right?
All right, welcome back, Jake.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kevin Bowen joining us on the Express Pro Tires and Auto Guest Line. True story about Joe Ferguson, though. Colorblind, and they had to come up with something to do. I'm not kidding you. It's not even a brain dropping. That's just knowledge, baby.
That is a brain dropping. It's from your brain, is it not?
That's true. All right. It is a feel-good, good for the heart Friday from Franciscan Health, and I've got a good one for you that is kind of an epilogue, if you will, a catching up with, to an extent, of a story that we have brought you in the past. We'll do all of that on the other side, and then, of course, Jimmy's wildly popular and available to be sponsored again, Plays of the Day, coming up in about 25. It's a Friday. You know what that means. Franciscan Health, good for the heart, feel good Friday. And again, if you ever have a suggestion of something you know in your community, maybe a student athlete in high school that finally gets an opportunity, overcoming an injury, or just defying the odds, one of those stories that makes everybody in the crowd feel good, I would love to know about it. You can always simply text me your suggestion at 317-523-9288. That's 317. Matter of fact, if it's simply 2 o'clock in the morning and you want to talk sports, I'm probably up. You can always text me at 317-523-9288, but I would love to know your feel-good story. Sometimes it has to do with something that reawakens a story that you knew from a long time ago that was tragic, and you're happy to know that there is a happy ending to it, which I will get to in just a moment. But I want to let you folks know when it comes to your heart health, that obviously is the most important thing, your health above all else, and the heart is a major part of that. For you men, on November 23rd, I want to remind you that at Googman House Brewing in Speedway, which is an awesome venue, and they got great beers there, we're going to be drinking beers, hanging out, having fun on November 23rd. That's 2 weeks from tomorrow. Is that right? 2 weeks from tomorrow. And Eddie and Mark Dykton will be doing a show there from 11 until 1 o'clock. It's part of Movember, presented by Franciscan Health. So when it comes to the men's health issues and maybe even some of those things that you're kind of embarrassed to talk about, look, we're all going to be guys. We're going to sit there. You can do for Movember, not shave, grow out the beard. I promise I'll have some scruff or a beard going on there. And J&B is going to be there. Our friends from Hank FM, WIBC, WTLC, we're all going to be there hanging out. Franciscan Health will be there to answer your men's health questions, do screenings as well. So we look forward to seeing you on the 23rd. But in terms of those screenings, you also should take into consideration from Franciscan, because they have very affordable heart scans. A non-invasive heart scan is just $49 at Franciscan Health, and we're talking about, of course, the hospital group that is number one in Indiana for interventional coronary care, number one for major cardiac surgery by CareChex, and the $49 scan is an excellent way to be preventative about your heart health and simply making sure, because you get a heart health risk assessment with the scan for just $49. You can pay out of pocket if you'd like. Not invasive, easy to do, and a great peace of mind when it comes to your heart and its health. Health is so important, and sometimes you hear a story in sport that hurts the heart a little bit. Like, for example, I want you to think back to when the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots were playing in the Super Bowl. I'm talking about the Malcolm Butler interception game when the Seahawks decided not to hand it off to Marshawn Lynch at the goal line. And lo and behold, everybody in Indianapolis and probably around the country just immediately thought, you've got to be kidding me, because the Patriots won another Super Bowl. And unless you were a fan of the Patriots, it wasn't necessarily one that was joyous in these parts. Seems like a long time ago, I realize. On that day also, many of you may not realize, but you know the story of Josh Spadell, who was the basketball player from Columbus North, an all-star player, one of the best players in the state at Columbus North, and a dynamic player and an extremely engaging personality that I think was a leader for his team, for his classmates, and for the state of Indiana amongst high school basketball, certainly on his way to being an Indiana All-Star. But it was on that day, when that game was being played, when he said, you know what, I'm actually going to go out and get some guys together and put up some shots, because that's what a hooper does, right? And I'm going to refine my game, and I'm going to get something to eat, and we're going to go and we're going to play some pickup basketball. And he was involved in a car accident that day, and I think most of you know that he then suffered a traumatic brain injury that not only put his future as a basketball player in the immediacy in doubt, but really just his survival in doubt. And he ended up, even though he had already accepted a scholarship to the University of Vermont, and there was question whether or not he would be able to play there, he had a determination about him where he said, you know what, I'm going to go to Vermont anyway, and I'm going to play. And this is somebody that was having to learn to do the simple things in life again, not how to hit an outside shot to break a zone, not how to get an extra step of separation to pull up from 10 feet, but rather to walk 10 feet, to remember what he had for lunch the day before, to be able to do the simple things that we take for granted that all of a sudden in the moment, in the flash of an eye due to a car accident that happened during that Super Bowl Sunday, Josh Bidell all of a sudden saw all of those things become a question mark. And the question became whether or not he would be able to, quote unquote, lead a normal life again. But what's a normal life in 2024? Well, for a lot of people, a normal life is, especially if you're a young person that's single, it's finishing up school, which he did at the University of Vermont. It's being able to have a team to cheer for, which he did because Vermont allowed him not only to be a part of their basketball program, even though he couldn't play, but I think many of you probably remember some a decade ago, 5 years ago or so, him being able to hit the first shot in what would have been his last game senior night of his senior year at Vermont. But once the crowds go away, the games go away, the attachment of a team goes away, then what happens for young people? And for Josh Bidell, it meant going back to trying to put a normal life back together once again. And a normal life in 2023, 2024, 2022, today's era, for a young person oftentimes means going online dating and trying to meet somebody, a significant other that you have a connection with, and in doing so, having to be open about the fact that, hey, sometimes we might be having a conversation and I might repeat myself, or I might ask you to repeat yourself because I had a traumatic brain injury. But when Josh Bidell met Madison just over a year ago, she didn't know the background. She didn't know the basketball story. She simply knew that he was going through something from a medical standpoint because she herself, working in the medical field, had worked with a compassion for people that were trying to come back. So they had an instant bond, an instant connection, and in a life where you are always hoping that people, when those things happen, can simply return to a quote-unquote normalcy. Life may never be 100% normal for Josh Bidell, but it is in this sense, in the fact that the story took a fabulous, not conclusion, because life is always ongoing, but a great new chapter in it. And thank you to Dana Benbow from the Indianapolis Star, Dana Hunsinger Benbow, for illuminating this during the time that I was on vacation. But it comes out that Josh Bidell and Madison were married just about a couple of months ago and are now enjoying a life as newlyweds. And she has said that the thing that she is most attracted to about him was simply his perseverance and his ability to go out, his transparency about what he's been through, and now the two of them working together in helping out with fundraisers like they did a week ago for a softball tournament for the Brain Injury Association of Indiana. The ultimate story of seeing before yourself a challenge or a game that you didn't think was going to be on the schedule, but taking it with the same passion and perseverance that you did when it was simply whether or not you were going to be able to help your team win a sectional. So I say hats off to both of them. A tremendous story, and I love their dedication as well to helping out other people that are now going through and entering into that same journey and the flash of an eye. And the thing with traumatic brain injuries that are so challenging for people is the fact that oftentimes it happens instantaneously and life changes right there, and it's a matter then of how you go about it. So kudos to both of them, and I was certainly thrilled to see when I was on vacation of their wedding and now their future as a young couple here in Central Indiana. So very, very cool, and congratulations to Josh. Again, heart scan, just $49. You have any questions about it, you can always call the telephone number 833-238-0688. You're not going to remember 833-238-0688, I realize. So you can simply Google Franciscan Health Heart Scan or franciscanhealth.org/screening bundles. We will return. We will get Jimmy's plays of the day, and we will also forecast what's going to happen at Lucas Oil Stadium between the Colts and the Bills on the other side.
Today's plays of the day extended into the weekend as well. First with action today, I'll take over 17.5 total points for Benedict Mathurin of the Indiana Pacers. They are on the road tonight against the Charlotte Hornets. In that same game, I'll lay the 7 on the Indiana Pacers to cover the number in Charlotte tonight. A lot of action across multiple sports this weekend. Indiana and Michigan, this opened at 10.5, favoring Indiana. It dropped to 9.5 briefly. It's now all the way up to 14.5 points. That's how much Indiana is the favorite tonight, or on Saturday, I beg your pardon. I'm not worried about the hook. I'm not worried about Indiana covering the number. This is what they do underneath Kirk Cignetti. I will lay the 14.5 on the Indiana Hoosiers tomorrow against Michigan.
Look at that, Jake. That's maturity right
later
there. Maturity.
Later that night, Alabama against LSU. Again, we gave a shout out earlier, but I'll give it again. Shout out to my good friend Nick Kuntz. His birthday is tomorrow. He is at Alabama at LSU. I'll take the Tide to win on the road. Probably the first time in a long time, Jake, there will be a live Tiger there for
really?
LSU's
You know they have
game.
a live Tiger at Massillon High School in Ohio?
Really?
North Central went and played there the 2 years that I was doing radio, and like all of a sudden they rolled out a tiger in a cage, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here?
Well, there will be one for the first time in quite some time when LSU takes on Alabama, but I do expect the Tide to get it done. I don't believe so. The permits were mixed up. They weren't able to get it done and get it turned around in enough time.
Only one live animal per game, please. No animals are harmed during this.
Last one on Saturday. This is a must-win game for Inter Miami to stay alive in the MLS playoffs. I will take Lionel Messi as an anytime goal scorer as Inter Miami goes on to defeat Atlanta United. NFL Sunday slate. I'll take the Commanders to win on the money line over the Pittsburgh Steelers. I will scoop the 7.5 on the Denver Broncos. They take on the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium. They're 7.5-point dogs. I think that winds up being a one-score game, so I'll scoop the points there. Eddie, any plays from you?
Scoopage.
A lot of scoopage. Any place for you?
I'm taking Miles Turner tonight to record a double-double. It'll be 3 consecutive games for Miles in that category. He talked about it after the game on, what day was that? Wednesday, and then before the game on Monday, that he has been given a task to rebound better, and Charlotte is not a good rebounding team, and with the extra effort that Turner is making on the glass, I like him to get a double-double tonight.
I'm going to scoop the idea that our boss, Jeff Rickard, threw out earlier and ask you guys this one. Over-under of 1.5, number of passes Anthony Richardson makes on Sunday.
Is it 1.5 or just a half?
Well, I'll go 1.5 because a half you could say maybe in a unique situation they put him in for one play.
Under.
Okay.
You?
I take the over on that.
Are you banking?
Why?
That's my question. Are you banking on, knock on wood for Joe Flacco, injuries,
No,
or
no,
are you
no.
banking on a set package for him?
Like I could see them using him in a package of some sort. I have nothing to base that on, and that's probably the dumbest thing ever. I don't think you
pass attempts or snaps.
I don't think you can. Well, that's also a really good question.
Because what if they decide to use him? Like I said, they shouldn't do, but Taysom Hill, and it's just a direct snap to him, and hey, go make a run.
Yeah, I mean that's
seems very reckless with a quarterback that's injury prone.
That certainly changes things, right? In terms of that. Yeah. Indiana, I think, is absolutely going to beat Michigan. 14.5 though is a lot different than 9, right?
It's incredibly different. They've covered every number. Maybe this is the one that's a bridge too far, but I'm all in on the Cignetti train, baby. I think they win. I think they win by 20.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean that you know what? Like you hear that and you're like, really? But then you think about it, that's kind of what they do, isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, they get a lead and then they just go, and it's like, holy cow, man.
Ooh, by the way, Charlie Kolar under 15.5 receiving yards last night. So we're back, baby. We're back at obscure player props. He only had one catch for like 7 yards.
You can get Indiana minus 19.5 at plus 150 or minus 20.5 at minus plus 164.
Hold on. Can you say that?
Give me that one more time.
Say that again and without sounding like you're on an airplane full of turbulence.
Plus 150 are the odds of Indiana to win minus 19.5. That would be they outscore Michigan by 20. Or they outscore Michigan by 21. That is plus 164.
What is the spread in the Ohio State-Purdue game?
That's weird. It says an infinity sign on it.
No, come on now.
37.5.
I would have said 30, just a blind guess. So
you got to go with Ohio State on that, don't you?
Yes.
I hate to say that.
Yep.
Okay, score predictions for Sunday, Jimmy. We'll begin with you.
Colts Bills, I sent this out to our head of social media, Nick Cottengem, earlier, 31-21. I think the Bills wind up having a field day offensively. The Colts looked more competent than they did on Sunday night, but it's still not enough. They lose. Bills win 31-21 final.
Eddie Garrison?
Give me the horse 21-20.
Wow, look at Eddie.
Matt Gay, game winner?
No, 21-20, Jimmy.
All right, okay.
3 touchdowns.
All right, okay.
If there's no Keon Coleman and Mari Cooper's banged up, this is the same Bills team that struggled to score points prior to the Amari Cooper trade.
26-17 Buffalo wins. I think Buffalo just doesn't turn the ball over, and I think that's going to be the Colts' best chance to try to limit Josh Allen. I just don't think.
Is the 17 because the offense struggles again, or the Bills are better defensively than we thought?
A little of both, probably.
Okay.
A little of both. Just stagnant, right?
Yeah.
It's just going to be, again, the most exciting thing is going to be Blue flinging Nerf balls around. All right, J&V is at Kilroy's. Is that Kilroy's downtown?
Yeah, I'm jealous.
Kilroy's downtown. J&V will be there.
Have some breadsticks.
It's going to be there.
Me,
Awesome breadsticks, diet breadsticks, he said. You can obviously enjoy a cold beverage, all of it for J&V and Kilroy's. He will be there until 6. We will be back with you at noon. A reminder, on Sunday, you can hear the Colts game on this radio station until 4:30 when the Pacers-Knicks pregame takes over on Sunday. You can hear the entire broadcast and postgame for the Colts radio network over on our sister station, Hank FM. We thank you for listening to Query & Company.